It started as a simple getaway. After a painful divorce, she decided to rent a small apartment through Airbnb in Denver, Colorado, hoping for a quiet weekend to herself. The listing seemed perfect. A two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Clean, modern, with good reviews, and a host who appeared responsive and polite. She arrived late in the afternoon, carrying a small suitcase and the weight of her recent life changes. The neighborhood was quiet, bordering on eerily still. Streetlights flickered in the autumn wind, and the occasional car passed by without anyone noticing her arrival. Upon entering, she felt a brief sense of relief. The apartment smelled faintly of bleach and fresh linen. It was empty, as advertised, and everything seemed in order. The bed neatly made, kitchen appliances spotless, and the furniture arranged with care. She unpacked her belongings, showered, and settled into the living room with a book and a cup of tea. The initial feeling of comfort persisted through the evening, but as the night deepened, small inconsistencies began to reveal themselves. She noticed items slightly out of place. A mug that had been on the counter was now on the dining table. The lights in the hallway flickered at irregular intervals. At first, she attributed it to fatigue and the quirks of an old building, but a subtle unease settled in. The noises began almost imperceptibly. Faint creaks of footsteps above the ceiling, doors closing softly in empty rooms, and the whisper of air currents through closed windows. She rationalized that old buildings settle at night. Still, a growing tension gnawed at her. The next morning, she ventured into the kitchen and found the refrigerator door slightly ajar. Items she didn't remember opening were missing. A small carton of milk, her leftover fruit, even a piece of bread seemed to have been disturbed. Anxiety replaced her calm. She checked every lock, every window. Nothing appeared forced. The door's chain lock was intact, and the windows shut firmly. Yet the sense of being observed lingered, pressing down on her like a weight she could not see. Days passed, and the subtle signs escalated. Towels disappeared from the bathroom. The bedsheets were slightly ruffled, and at times she felt a presence in the living room, though she could see no one. Sleep became difficult. Her dreams were restless, filled with the sensation of someone watching her from the corners of the apartment. She installed her phone on a tripod in the living room, intending to record the space overnight, thinking perhaps she was imagining things. The footage revealed what she feared most. Around 2 a.m, a shadow moved across the frame. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, but then the shape became unmistakable. A thin, gaunt figure emerged from an alcove near the ceiling, almost like it had slipped out of the structure itself. The figure watched silently, its movements slow and deliberate. The purse-nor, something that resembled one, returned to the hiding place, disappearing from view. She paused the video repeatedly, disbelief battling terror. Her rational mind fought the instinctive horror that had taken root. She called the host immediately. The voice on the line was friendly, courteous, but unable to explain the footage. Perhaps a neighbor, he suggested, though his tone wavered. She didn't mention the details, fearing disbelief or confrontation. Instead, she stayed out for most of the day, returning briefly to collect her things. Upon arrival, the apartment seemed untouched, as if the shadow never existed. The sense of violation, however, lingered. Night came again, and she resolved to confront the fear directly. She stayed awake, sitting rigidly on the sofa, every sound amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog outside, the wind scraping against the window frames. At 2:17 a.m., a faint noise drew her attention, a soft creak from the ceiling. Her heart raced. Slowly, cautiously, she pointed her phone's flashlight upward. There it was, the same figure, hunched and thin, staring down at her. Its eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to pierce through the dim light. She wanted to scream, to flee, yet her body froze, caught between disbelief and terror. The figure moved with unnatural stillness, almost gliding, and then it was gone. She never saw it leave, never saw any sign of exit. She packed her belongings immediately, abandoning the weekend she had hoped would restore calm. Outside, the night air was crisp, and the streets were quiet once again, deceptively normal. She returned home, but the unease traveled with her, a lingering shadow over her thoughts. Months later, she learned through forums that other guests had reported similar experiences at the same Airbnb. Items disappearing, sounds at night, glimpses of shadows where no one should be. The hosts remained listed on the platform, polite and efficient, answering inquiries but never acknowledging any wrongdoing. The footage she had recorded remained a secret, a chilling reminder that she had never truly been alone. Even now, long after leaving, she wonders if the figure remains, whether it watches from hidden alcoves, slipping through spaces unseen, waiting for another guest who trusts the listing blindly. Sometimes, she feels it in the corner of her eye in her own apartment, a fleeting shadow that vanishes the moment she focuses on it. The thought that she was never truly alone continues to haunt her, a question that has no answer, leaving only the lingering fear that some guests never truly leave. It was meant to be a weekend escape. A small group of friends decided to rent a cabin in the remote mountains of Tennessee, seeking solitude from the city's constant noise. The listing promised peace and privacy, describing a rustic but well-kept wooden cabin nestled deep in the forest. Reviews spoke of serene mornings, breathtaking views, and the kind of quiet that made time seem slower. They arrived on a Friday afternoon, the air crisp and carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The gravel road leading to the cabin twisted and narrowed until the car rattled over the final stretch of uneven stones, arriving at a place that felt both inviting and unnervingly isolated. The cabin itself was small but cozy. A stone fireplace dominated the living room, with armchairs arranged around it and a small kitchen tucked to one side. Wooden floors creaked under their weight, and the walls were lined with simple paintings of mountain landscapes. It was clean, almost suspiciously so, but the warmth of the space, coupled with the fall sunlight streaming through the windows, created a sense of temporary comfort. The first night was uneventful. They cooked dinner together, left, and played cards by the fire. But as darkness fell and the forest beyond the windows became an impenetrable black, subtle noises began to intrude. The wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin walls, branches tapped against the roof, and a faint creaking echoed somewhere above them. At first, they laughed it off, attributing the sounds to the age of the building and the forest settling in the night. Around midnight, as they prepared for bed, the noises changed. The creaking became deliberate, like footsteps pacing in a room above. Soft murmurs drifted through the cabin voices, low and indistinct, whispering words they could not understand. They assumed it was their imagination, the result of isolation and fatigue. One of the friends joked about the cabin being haunted, but the unease that had started as a whisper now pressed down heavily on their consciousness. The next morning, they explored the cabin thoroughly. Nothing appeared out of place. The bedrooms were tidy, the kitchen untouched, and no evidence of any other presence could be found. They laughed nervously, trying to dispel the lingering tension, but the sense of being watched persisted. That afternoon, they hiked nearby trails, but even in the daylight, they felt the forest around them was too quiet, too still, as though it were holding its breath. Night fell again, heavier this time. The whispers returned shortly after midnight. They were clearer now, though still unintelligible. The voices seemed to echo from the cabin itself, bouncing off the walls and floorboards. Sometimes, the whispers would repeat a single word or a name, though none of them could recognize it. Doors would creak open slowly on their own, and the wind seemed to carry laughter that wasn't theirs. One of the friends recorded some of the sounds on their phone, hoping to capture evidence, but when they played it back, it sounded distorted, almost as if the voices existed slightly out of sync with reality, layering over the natural sounds of the cabin. As the nights continued, the manifestations escalated. Steps paced the upper floor, even when everyone was in the same room. Objects shifted positions. Chairs scraped against the floor when no one was near. The whispers sometimes formed short phrases, fragments of sentences, but always just beyond comprehension. Fear replaced amusement, and sleep became impossible. They began to feel as though the cabin itself was alive, aware of team, and unwilling to let them leave unobserved. One night, one of the friends awoke to a voice calling their name from the corner of the bedroom. Sitting upright, heart hammering, they saw nothing but shadows stretching unnaturally across the wooden walls. The air was cold, and a damp smell, faintly metallic, filled the room. They wanted to wake the others, but the voice continued, insistent, yet distant, almost pleading. It drew their attention toward the window. Outside, the forest was still. No movement, no light, nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched intensified until they could no longer breathe easily. The final night was unbearable. They stayed awake together, huddled in the living room, clutching each other for comfort. Every creak, every whisper, every brush of air against the walls seemed amplified, charged with intention. At precisely 2:03 a.m., the murmurs coalesced into a patina chorus of names and dates they did not recognize. The room felt impossibly large, as if the cabin had expanded around them, and shadows moved with purpose, lingering at the edges of vision. No one slept. No one spoke. When morning arrived, the forest appeared unchanged, silent and indifferent. The cabin seemed empty, yet the oppressive atmosphere remained. They packed quickly, leaving the cabin in a hurry, the door swinging shut behind them as if relieved to see them go. Driving down the gravel road, they dared not look back, fearing the woods might still be watching. Back home, the memories lingered. Some of them claimed to hear faint whispers, when alone, fleeting shadows at the corner of their vision, and the inexplicable sensation of being observed in spaces that were supposed to be safe. Attempts to research the cabin's history revealed little. An old property with sporadic rentals, obscure records of former owners, and rumors of mysterious disappearances in the surrounding woods decades earlier. Nothing concrete, nothing verifiable, just fragments that suggested the whispers were older than any of them could understand. They never returned, and sometimes, late at night, they wonder if the cabin remains awake, listening, waiting for new visitors to stumble into its silence, voices trailing behind them like an invisible shadow that refuses to release its hold. She arrived in Paris on a cool, gray afternoon, the city bustling with tourists and the faint hum of cars and scooters drifting through narrow streets. After a long flight, she was eager for a brief escape, a chance to explore a city she had dreamed of for years. The Airbnb she booked promised convenience and charm, a small apartment in a historic building, close to cafes and metro stations. The host was polite and punctual, sending clear instructions on how to access the key and reassuring her that everything would be perfect. The initial impression was as advertised. The building was old but elegant, the stone facade weathered gracefully by decades of Parisian rain and sun. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of lavender and cleaning products, the furniture neatly arranged, and the small kitchen spotless. She unpacked her luggage, admiring the view of the quiet street below. The host had sent a message upon her arrival that it had been a small mix-up, and she would be staying in another apartment nearby, just a few doors down. At first, she assumed it was no problem, trusting the host's professionalism. The new apartment was similar, almost identical, but something about it felt off. The layout was slightly different, the air colder, and an oppressive silence hung over the space, unlike the warmth of the previous unit. That night, she settled into the unfamiliar room, trying to ignore her unease. The apartment was clean, the bed made, the windows tightly closed. Yet, she could not shake the feeling that someone was watching. Footsteps creaked above her, though the building seemed empty. The hum of the heating system was irregular, and occasionally she heard a door click somewhere beyond her comprehension. She told herself she was tired, that the stress of travel and jet lag was playing tricks on her mind. The following day, small inconsistencies appeared. A coffee cup she had set on the counter was moved. The towels were not where she had left them. A jacket she had hung carefully in the closet appeared draped over a chair. Initially, she dismissed these as accidental or a result of the previous guest. But as the day wore on, her anxiety deepened. Every noise felt amplified. The gentle creak of floorboards, the subtle whisper of wind through the cracks, and the distant sound of someone moving in another room, or perhaps the same room she occupied. On the second night, her fear intensified. She awoke to the faint sound of someone breathing nearby. The room was dark, but her senses were alert, hyper-aware of every shadow. She reached for her phone and turned on the flashlight. Nothing. Yet the sensation of another presence persisted. She realized that the locks, while appearing secure, might not prevent someone with knowledge of the building from entering. Desperate for evidence, She set up her phone to record overnight. The video captured strange movements, shadows that shifted against the walls, indistinct shapes passing through the hallway, and the faintest creak of floorboards when she knew no one was moving. At times, the lights flickered, illuminating an empty room for a fraction of a second before plunging her into darkness again. Attempts to contact the host yielded polite but vague responses. "Perhaps the building is old," he suggested. "Things settle naturally, nothing to worry about." But she could not ignore what she had seen. Something in the apartment was wrong. The air felt heavier, the corners darker, as if they were absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The final night was unbearable. She stayed awake, huddled under a blanket in the living room, listening to the irregular sounds. Footsteps pacing above, doors clicking, soft murmurs that seemed almost intelligible. Every time she dared to investigate, the sounds would stop, leaving only the suffocating silence. She felt trapped, unsure whether leaving would truly escape the presence in the apartment. The next morning, she packed her belongings quickly. She left the apartment without even saying goodbye, the door swinging shut behind her as if relieved. The streets of Paris were vibrant and indifferent, offering no sign of the dread she had experienced. Once home, the memories persisted. She replayed the footage from her phone repeatedly, each time noticing new shadows or movements she had previously missed. Months later, she discovered online forums discussing similar incidents. Guests had reported rooms being switched, items moved, strange noises, and the inexplicable feeling of being observed. The host remained active on the platform, reviews praising the location and convenience, yet whispers of unease lingered among those who had experienced the anomaly. Even now, she sometimes imagines the apartment exists in a different dimension, its doors and walls hiding a presence that remains unseen, waiting for the next guest who trusts the listing blindly. The thought that she may have never truly left the apartment continues to haunt her, leaving only the chilling question: what happens when a room is no longer the room you reserved?